8 years. That's how long I spent watching a woman breathe without waking. A woman I once loved so much it hurt to be near her. And then, so little it hurt even more to keep pretending. 8 years of driving the same route to the Riverbrook Care Facility, through the same 4 stoplights, past the same sun-bleached billboard advertising estate lawyers and funeral homes. 8 years of showing up to her bedside like a ritual, sitting in the same goddamn vinyl chair, beside the same machine that hummed like it knew something I didn't. Her name was Laura. My wife. My burden. The doctors used phrases like permanent vegetative state and non-responsive but stable. Their words were clean, detached, surgical. Mine were not. Mine were buried under years of slow collapse, of house repairs left undone, mail stacked in crooked towers, dinners eaten in silence because even when I was home, I wasn't there. She was 27 when the accident happened. Just a flash of deer eyes in the dark, black ice on a forgotten road, and everything changed. The driver, her brother, died instantly. Laura survived, if you can call it that. The first year I lived inside hope. I clung to the idea that she'd come back, that the part of her I married, the fire, the wit, the quiet defiance, was still there, submerged just beneath the skin. I whispered to her like she was listening. I brought her favorite books, though I couldn't bring myself to read them aloud. I told her about the world outside, about Tom, about bills and weather and small things that didn't matter. It made no difference. Year 2 was worse. That's when Tom stopped asking about her. My stepson was 13 then. Angry, hormonal, confused. I tried to be gentle. I tried to be firm. I tried to be everything. But all he wanted was his mother, and I couldn't give her back. He stopped coming with me to the facility. Said it smelled like bleach and sadness. Said she wasn't really in there anymore. That she was like a mannequin. I should have corrected him. Should have told him not to speak of his mother that way. But the truth is, I didn't disagree. By year 4, the visits stopped being about hope. They became a habit, a box to check, a rope I tied around my own neck every evening, just to prove I hadn't let go. I told myself I was honoring a vow, that it was about loyalty. But deep down, I think I stayed because if I let her go, I'd have to look in the mirror and admit the rest of my life was built on a lie. There was no marriage left. Just a man and a woman trapped on opposite sides of silence. And yet, I paid for everything. The private room, the supplemental care, the physiotherapy, even though she hadn't moved of her own will in half a decade. The scented soaps and non-medical shampoos the nurses used when they remembered. All of it, down to the smallest comfort, came out of my pocket. Even when I had to take on consulting work I hated, even when the hours stretched thin and the bank account thinner, I kept paying. Because I couldn't explain the alternative. Because it felt like theft to walk away. But lately, something was wrong. Started small. That's how these things always start. Cardigan I didn't recognize. A faint floral perfume lingering near the pillow. Something Laura never wore. Not even before the accident. I asked the staff. They shrugged. Maybe a family friend brought something, they said. Maybe laundry sent the wrong garment. Maybe, always maybe. I nodded, smiled politely, and went home. But it wasn't just once. The next week, a pair of soft blue pajama pants. Not regulation hospital wear. Deliberate, clean, folded neatly under the blanket like someone had taken care to tuck her in. I leaned in close, trying to detect a trace of scent again. There it was. Warmth. A hint of something domestic. Cotton, perhaps. Fabric softener. Home. She looked peaceful, I'll admit. But peaceful in a way that made my skin crawl. So I started keeping track. I took notes on a yellow legal pad I kept hidden in my coat pocket. Dates. Times. Descriptions of each change. June 3rd, green wool sweater. Hand-knitted. Faint smell of cedar. June 5th, navy blouse, pearl buttons, not in facility laundry records. June 6th, hospital gown, back to normal. June 7th, gray hoodie, small tear on left sleeve, tag removed. Every other day it changed. Not always, but enough. And it was never staff. I asked the head nurse, Deborah, to confirm who had access to Laura's room. She hesitated, said I was within my rights to inquire, but asked if something was wrong. I told her no, just curiosity. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. That night, I sat in my car outside the facility for an hour. Lights blinked off one wing at a time. Visiting hours ended. The parking lot cleared. Staff changed shift. At 12:16 a.m., a light turned on in Laura's room. I saw it from across the lot, just for a second. Then, a shadow moved past the curtain. Someone inside. I got out of the car, heart pounding, steps slow and careful. But by the time I reached the glass double doors, the light was off. Gone. Nothing to see. I didn't ring the bell. Didn't ask to be let in. What would I have said? That I thought someone was playing dress-up with my unconscious wife? I went home. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried not to think about the way Tom had looked at me that morning. He'd asked, offhand, what time I'd be leaving for my next business trip. Said it with that knowing smirk he wore whenever he wanted to remind me I didn't belong. He was 17 now, taller than me, smarter too, or at least he thought so. And the strange thing was he knew my schedule too well. He knew when I left, when I returned, when I called the facility, when I didn't. It had always been chalked up to routine. We were creatures of habit, weren't we? But now, I started to wonder, because someone was going to see Laura when no one was supposed to. Someone who knew exactly when I wouldn't be there. And the clothes, they weren't just random. They were hers. From before. From our life together. Some of them I remembered packing away. Some of them I was sure were gone. Donated. Burned. So how did they end up here? Who brought them? Who undressed her? There's a kind of fury that doesn't rise like fire. It sinks, slow and deep, like sediment in your lungs. That's what I felt. Not rage. Not jealousy. Something heavier. Something that made me question not just who had been in that room, but whether Laura had ever truly been alone in the first place. And whether I had been. For 8 years I paid. For 8 years I waited. But now I had questions. And if no one wanted to give me answers, then I'd have to take them. I told Tom I'd be flying out Monday morning. Atlanta, I said. Conference. Long week. I left my suitcase by the door, keys on the hook. He barely looked up from his phone. Back Friday? He asked casual, like we weren't even pretending anymore. Thursday late, I answered. He nodded. No follow-up questions. He knew. I could see it in his face. He knew down to the minute when I would disappear, and more importantly, when I'd return. I wanted to ask how. I wanted to ask why. But I didn't, because by then I already had a plan. The morning of the flight, I drove to the airport, circled the lot, then veered off the freeway and doubled back through a service road. I parked at a rundown motel 15 minutes from Riverbrook. One of those places with cracked ice machines and thin walls. Paid cash. Left the TV on just loud enough to drown out my thoughts. And I waited. I visited the clinic just once that day. Not as myself, not really. I wore a baseball cap pulled low. Gray hoodie zipped halfway. Sunglasses. Nobody looked twice. I walked past the East Wing like I belonged. Checked the visitor log on my way out. No unusual names. No family. No one but me recorded, dated, signed. But I knew that was a lie. That night, I stayed in my car. Engine off. Windows cracked. Parked just far enough from the clinic not to draw suspicion. Just close enough to see the wing Laura lived in. It was quiet. Still. Hours crawled by. At 11:57 p.m., the light came on in her room. Not the hallway motion lights. Her room. One window, second floor. Fluorescent. Sharp. My hands went cold. I watched. 12:01. A shape passed in front of the curtain. Not a nurse. Not in scrubs. A man, tall, thin, quick on his feet. Wearing dark jeans and a jacket. The kind of jacket Tom wore on school nights when he snuck out to meet girls and thought I didn't know. But this wasn't a date. This was something else. The figure stayed inside for 13 minutes. I didn't blink. I counted. Every second. Every breath. At 12:14 he left. Out the side exit. No badge. No sign-in. No staff escort. Just slipped into the shadows like a habit. I started the car. My hands were shaking. I didn't follow him. I should have. But I couldn't, because I already knew. I returned to the motel, sat on the edge of the bed, stared at my hands like they didn't belong to me. 13 minutes. Every night? Every other night? How long had it been going on? I didn't sleep. I just sat there, awake, listening to the ice machine cycle and the hum of fluorescent lights above the mirror. The next morning I visited as usual. Fresh shirt, tired eyes. Laura looked content. There was lipstick on her mouth. Faint, subtle. Not the garish red from our wedding. Not the barely there bomb she used to keep in her purse. Something in between. Applied carefully. Not by staff. Her hair was brushed. Not professionally. Personally. Strands behind her ear. Tucked like a lover would do. I didn't touch her. Not that day. I stood near the bed, studying every crease in the blanket, every detail of the soft lavender sweater she wore. I hadn't seen that sweater in over a decade. I remembered it from the cabin. The weekend we fought. The one where she said she wasn't sure she wanted to stay. Still fit. Still clean. No hospital tag. No note of origin. Just there. When I stepped out into the hallway, Dr. Farrow was waiting. He was in his 50s, maybe older, and always too polite for confrontation. But that day he stopped me. "Michael," he said, voice low, "can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Who else has access to her room after midnight?" I froze. "Excuse me?" I reviewed the logs. "You're the only consistent visitor. But there's inconsistencies." He shifted his weight. Late night shifts. Unscheduled room activity. Unauthorized lighting. My heart was pounding. "I was going to ask the staff," he continued. "But then I heard something strange from your stepson. He mentioned your travel schedule. Exact times. Exact returns. Almost to the hour." I didn't answer. Farrow's gaze darkened. "I just thought you should know." I nodded. Said nothing. Walked away. He didn't follow. That was all I needed. That question. That tone. That crack in the professional mask that said more than the words ever could. It confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was using her, dressing her, visiting her. And it wasn't medical. It wasn't staff. It wasn't sanctioned. It was personal. And worse, someone close to me knew about it. Maybe even helped. I drove home. Didn't speak a word to Tom. He asked how the trip went. I said fine. He smiled. Smug. Confident. Secure. I poured a drink. Sat in the dark. Stared out the window at the shape of my life. Collapsing. Then I started digging. Not the kind of digging people notice. Quiet digging. Cold, patient, relentless. I called the facility. Pretended I wanted to surprise Laura with a visitor while I was away. Asked if anyone had dropped by. Cross-referenced names with faces I knew. No hits. I checked staff schedules. Night nurses. Janitorial. Maintenance. All accounted for. All but one. An intern named Jay. No last name given. No official start date. No contract on file. Showed up for 4 nights in April. Then never again. I looked deeper. Searched his name against security footage timestamps. Nothing. No visual. But the log showed his badge used the east stairwell 4 times between midnight and 2 a.m. Then I pulled the visitor logs again. Tom had never signed in. Not once. But that wasn't strange. What was strange were the unexplained entries. Smudged names, initials, even blank rows with manual override notations. 13 instances. Over 5 months. All between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. I called the front desk. Asked about camera access. They said footage was only stored for 30 days. I was already too late, so I changed tactics. I started reviewing receipts, credit card history, gas purchases, online orders. Nothing major, until I found a charge, $42. 78, women's clothing vintage resale shop downtown. A place Laura used to love. A place that went out of business 5 years ago. I called the number anyway. Forwarded to a new shop. The woman on the line was kind. Helpful. Yes, she said. That purchase was last month. Young guy. Tall. Hoodie. Picked out a lavender sweater. Said it was for his mom. Very particular about the size. I thanked her. Hung up. Sat in silence. Because I knew that sweater. The one Laura had worn the morning before. I went to Tom's room that night. He wasn't home. I let myself in. Quiet. Careful. His drawers were locked. But his closet wasn't. Inside 2 shoe boxes. One labeled old junk. Inside photos. One of Laura. Pre-accident. Pre-marriage. Back when Tom was still a child. Another Laura in the coma. Wearing a different set of clothes than I'd ever seen. My hands trembled. There was also a vial. Clear. No label. Empty. And underneath it all, folded beneath an old sweatshirt, a note. One word, scratched in jagged handwriting. Soon. I closed the box. Put it back. Didn't say a word. Didn't confront him. Because it was no longer about rage. No longer about jealousy. It was about something deeper. Something wrong. Something rotten in the bones of my home. Laura was gone. Not dead, but not there. And someone had used her absence to move in the shadows. Now I had a decision to make. And I made it. The next morning, I canceled her private care plan. Pulled my card from the billing office. I told the facility I needed time to reassess. I used words like review and temporary hold and financial hardship. They didn't ask questions. Because they already knew something was off. So did I. I went back to the motel one last time. Sat on the same bed. Looked out the same window. And I whispered it aloud. Just once. Just to feel the shape of it in my mouth. She's not in there anymore. Then I closed my eyes. And I let go. I didn't tell anyone I'd stopped paying. Not the clinic. Not Tom. Not even Laura's sister, who used to call once a year like a clock set wrong. It felt ceremonial. I remember standing in the hallway outside Laura's room the next day. The nurse, Debbie, was humming under her breath. The hallway lights flickered the way they always did when it rained. And the billing office hadn't noticed yet. That would take time. Paperwork. Lag. Until then, nothing would change on the surface. But I'd already felt the shift. It wasn't just that I'd pulled the card. It was that I'd finally let myself believe she was never coming back. That belief cracked something open. And when it did, what leaked out was fury. Not the shouting kind, not the kind you throw against a wall. The other kind. Cold. Methodical. I began with the visitor logs. Requested them through a fabricated story. That my lawyer had asked me to review all traffic to her room, just in case her long-term care had any future legal complications. They didn't ask why. Didn't even blink. Just printed the logs and handed them over in a thin manila folder like it meant nothing. But it meant everything. I took it home, locked my office door, and started cross-referencing. Times, dates, notes, redacted initials, blank spaces that should have had names. What I found made the room go still. The late-night visits, the ones marked override, started just after her 3rd year in the coma. That was also the year Tom stopped asking about her completely. I had assumed it was grief, detachment, the growing silence of a boy learning to live without a mother. But now I wasn't so sure. One entry stood out. November 14th. Visitor initials. T. R. Time of entry. 12:19 a.m. Duration. 48 minutes. No exit recorded. T. R. Tom Reeves. My stepson. I stared at the page until the lines blurred. 48 minutes. At the time, he would have been 15. Just a kid. A quiet one. Withdrawn, brittle, never affectionate, but not cruel. Not then. But how does a 15-year-old get into a secure room at midnight? How does he stay almost an hour without triggering a single protocol? Unless someone helped him. Unless someone wanted him there. Unless this went deeper than I imagined. I kept digging. The names on the logs weren't all aliases. Some were real. Staff mostly. Orderlies. Nurses. But I noticed a pattern. Every time one of them logged a late-night visit to Laura's room, they disappeared from the staff records within 2 weeks. Turnover? Possibly. Coincidence? Unlikely. I made a list. 5 names. Called each one. Only 2 answered. The first, Elliot, former night shift orderly, spoke in hushed tones. Said he'd left after a misunderstanding with the clinic. Said he didn't want to be involved. Said he didn't want to go up against them. I asked him what he meant. He hung up. The second, Marie, a nurse, sounded exhausted before I even said who I was. When I asked about Laura's room, there was a long pause. Then, she didn't belong there. What do you mean? Another pause. She wasn't sick. That stuck. I asked her to explain, but she refused. Said she was done. That she'd said too much. That she had a new job and a new name, and that I should let sleeping dogs rot. Not lie rot. I hung up with my skin cold. The next day, Dr. Farrow called me. Not his assistant, him. Direct. Unscheduled. He said he'd looked into the badge scans from the night I'd gone to Atlanta. There was no business trip, was there? He asked, voice low. No, I said. I thought not. Then he asked the question I hadn't let myself say out loud. Why did Tom know your exact travel schedule? I didn't answer. Because I couldn't. Because if I spoke, the truth would come out sideways, violent and jagged. Instead, I asked him a question of my own. How long have you known something was off? He hesitated. Then, long enough to be afraid of knowing more. That was all I needed. Because fear like that doesn't come from error. Comes from rot. From complicity. From something so deeply broken that even naming it feels dangerous. I told him I was cutting off payment. Not just temporary. Permanently. I told him to start an inquiry. An investigation. File whatever formal notice needed to be filed. I said I would no longer be involved. Not financially. Not emotionally. He didn't argue. Didn't try to convince me otherwise. Because he already knew I was right. What came next moved quickly. Within 72 hours, Laura's care account was flagged. I received a call from the administrator. A tight-voiced woman who tried to sound concerned, not desperate. She said there'd been a billing issue and asked if we'd be continuing services. I told her we would not. She asked if another family member would be taking over. I told her to ask Tom. Silence. A pause. Then, very well. The next day, I got a message from Laura's old friend Denise. We hadn't spoken in years. She said she was shocked by what she'd heard. That Laura's status was being reviewed. That there were whispers, legal whispers, ethical ones. That an internal audit was underway. That some of the staff had already been suspended. She didn't say why, but I knew, because this was never about medicine. It wasn't even about love. It was about control. And someone, possibly more than one, had used Laura's condition like a veil. A way to hide something else. Something foul. And I had funded it. For 8 years. 8 years of believing I was fulfilling a vow. That I was being noble. That I was the good man who stayed. But what if I was just the man who let it happen? What if my silence paid for their secrets? What if my loyalty was the currency they needed to keep her quiet? I walked into Tom's room that night. He was at his desk, headphones on, studying, or pretending. He looked up when I entered. No guilt, just the blank mask of a teenager who knows the world can't touch him. I held up a folder, the visitor logs, the staff list, the receipts. Do you want to tell me the truth? His jaw tensed, just slightly. Then he smiled. No, he said. I don't think I do. That was it. No apology. No denial. Just a smile that said, you're too late. And maybe I was. But I wasn't powerless anymore. I didn't shout. Didn't argue. Didn't even sit down. I turned around. Walked out. Closed the door gently behind me. And in that silence, I made the last decision I would ever make for him. From that moment on, he was not my problem. And Laura? Laura was not my wife. Not anymore. The person in that bed wasn't someone I loved. She was the anchor I had tied to my own ankles while everyone else swam away. The next morning, I filed a motion. Legal severance. Power of attorney revoked. Financial responsibility nullified. I didn't speak to Tom again. I didn't visit Laura. I didn't answer the phone when the clinic called 3 days later with important updates. I was done. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because the truth had finally surfaced. They weren't using her body to heal, they were using it to hide. And I'd paid for the privilege. Never again. The letter arrived 2 weeks later. Certified. Heavy paper. Courteous language that barely hid the panic underneath. A formal request from the facility for clarification. Would I be reinstating Laura's care plan? They were eager to resolve any misunderstandings. They were concerned about disruption of services. They were available at my convenience. I didn't answer. Instead, I folded the letter once, placed it in the drawer beside my old wedding band, and slid it shut without a word. I wasn't their bank anymore. I wasn't her husband. I wasn't anything at all. And for the first time in 8 years, I could breathe. Funny thing about silence, it used to scare me. The quiet of our house after Laura's accident felt like punishment. I fill it with noise. TV murmuring in the background. Tom stomping through the halls. Even the hum of the refrigerator became a companion. But now, silence was peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from hope, but from release. Tom didn't say much after that. He moved differently, slower. He avoided eye contact when we crossed paths in the hallway, started locking his door even when he was home. There was no apology, no confrontation, just a slow unraveling. He stopped asking for money, stopped expecting anything, because he knew what I'd seen. And more than that, he knew I'd stopped pretending. One night, I passed by his door and heard him talking. Low voice, angry, not shouting, just tight and venomous. I paused. He was on the phone with someone. I only caught a few words. He cut her off. Yeah, completely. Says she was never coming back. I told you, didn't I? He always wanted her gone. That last part stuck. He always wanted her gone. It was a lie, of course, but one that told the truth in reverse. Because he wanted her back. But on his terms. Not conscious. Not questioning. Not present enough to reject whatever twisted illusion he'd built inside her absence. I stood there a moment longer, then walked away. That was the last time I let him take up space in my head. Weeks passed. The investigation at the clinic gained traction. I received a follow-up from Dr. Farrow, this time via voicemail. Michael, he said, you were right to step away. There's more here than I understood. You may be contacted. Stay alert. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't have to. Whatever had lived in that room with Laura, whatever ritual of secrecy and access they'd built around her comatose body, it was crumbling now. I didn't want details. I didn't need them. The point wasn't the specifics. It was the betrayal. Of her. Of me. Of every year I spent believing that love meant staying. But staying isn't always love. Sometimes it's fear wearing a ring. I think the worst part, the part that still won't let go, is that I don't know if Laura was complicit. Maybe she was awake all along. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe she slipped in and out, aware enough to know I was there, but silent for her own reasons. Or maybe they told her things, fed her a story about me, about the man paying the bills but not holding her hand. Maybe in her mind, I was the one who vanished. I'll never know, and I've stopped asking. The neighbors started whispering. You could feel it, conversations that ended when I walked past. Sympathy glances at the grocery store. One of them even asked carefully, "Is Laura still at the clinic?" I smiled. Not warmly. "No," I said. "She's where she belongs." They didn't ask what that meant. They never do. One afternoon, I received a text from Denise. Just 3 words. She opened her eyes. I stared at the screen. Blinked. Read it again. No punctuation. No context. No follow-up. I didn't reply, because that message wasn't for me. It was for the man I used to be. The one who'd rush down to the clinic, flowers in hand, heart racing with hope. The one who believed a single blink meant love could be restored. But I buried that man weeks ago, and when I did, I left room for someone else. Someone who could live a life without begging for meaning from the past. I didn't go see Laura. Not even once. I don't know if she's awake now. I don't know if she's walking, talking, remembering. I don't know if she ever asks about me. But I know this. If she wanted me in the room, I would have been. If she had ever tried, ever once, to reach out through that stillness, I would have stayed. But there was nothing. Just 8 years of waiting. And a man at midnight. The house feels different now. I took down the photos, packed away the wedding album. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. The life we had was real once, but it died. And I was the only one who mourned it. I still think about her. Sometimes. Like when the radio plays a song from the year we met. Or when I see someone in a lavender sweater. And my stomach turns before I remember that the person I buried is still alive. Or was. Tom left last month. Said he needed space. Took a few boxes and a laptop. Didn't say goodbye. Just a note on the counter. You did what you had to do. So did I. No return address. No forwarding info. I haven't tried to find him. I won't. Because the truth is, I don't want reconciliation. Not with him. Not with her. Not with the silence that pretended to be a family. What I want is honesty. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is disappear from the life you built too well. The life that devoured you. So now I live alone. The quiet isn't empty. It's clean. I cook for one. I read. I sleep through the night without dreaming of machines that beep in the dark. The legal documents came through last week. Severance finalized. No further obligations. Financial or otherwise. I signed them slowly. Line by line. My signature trembling at first, then steadying. By the last page I felt lighter. They say closure doesn't exist. That there's only acceptance. But that's not true. Closure exists. It's just not always gentle. Sometimes, it's a door you lock from the outside and walk away from while the house burns behind you. Sometimes, it's the sound of your own footsteps on pavement you paid for, leading somewhere no one gets to follow. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's a question. A sharp one. A bitter one. The only one that still matters. If you were me, would you have stayed? Would you have kept paying for the silence? Would you have kissed her forehead every night, knowing another man touched her after you left? Would you have endured it? Or would you have walked away? Cold, steady, alone? You know my answer. What's yours?